Hmm. Hello again from my front porch. Obviously, I'm not on my front porch. I am yet again here in a hotel room. Where am I this time? Cincinnati, Ohio. Well, outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, but still. I'm in the Cincinnati, Ohio area here for some. Actually, was supposed to have been at training today, observing it. But that snow that we had moved through Iowa followed me here into Ohio, and apparently they didn't want to deal with it trying to get people to the training today, so it got postponed to tomorrow. Messed up all the plans, and I had to change my flight schedules and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, gave me time to get some stuff done here in my hotel room, and it was productive. Got some things done, but I also have been perusing through the internet some, and there's a big discussion going on that I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and weigh in, and we'll see how that works out for me, because I'm going to share some stuff that some people are not going to like. What's funny is there'll be different people who are not going to like it for different reasons. And that usually means that I'm right where I want to be, in the middle. But so let me just put this down for a minute. This topic of you probably have heard a lot of it now, freedom of speech, and it's brought about because there are individuals, mostly political individuals, who have said some things and feel like they should have been okay to say those things without any repercussion whatsoever, because we have the First Amendment freedom of speech. And it's not just the high level political people that you might be thinking of. There's some other I call them grassroots individuals, volunteers, hard partisan campaign people who are out there shooting off their mouth about things, posting stuff on social media. Yeah, there have even now been some actual lawsuits that President Trump has sued news organizations for publishing stuff or broadcasting stuff that was deceptive, that was not authentic. And so, with that being the case, they're a little more mindful now of what they're doing, because nobody wants to get sued. Understandable. But the thing that is now coming up is I'm now seeing more and more individuals trying to explain away or defend the individuals who have said these things that some deem problematic or even offensive, or in some cases even illegal. That the what has been said, but others want to defend those things by saying you can't do anything to them because they have freedom of speech. Well, first of all, I am not a constitutional scholar. I would not present myself as such. I'm not going to try to claim that I have any of that kind of background or knowledge. But I will qualify that statement with reminding you that my degree actually is in journalism. I worked in the journalism field. I even won the Iowa Newspaper Association Award for a big chunk of my work in print journalism. I also worked at a Central Iowa television station, one of the news stations, back when I was in college, so a couple of years ago. But in addition to my journalism degree, I also minored in political science, and I have a minor in U.S. history. And then I was licensed to teach journalism, government, and U.S. history at the junior and senior high school level here in Iowa. Now, I have since let that license lapse because I didn't need it. I'm not actively teaching in the public school system, but it's still in good standing, if you will, in that I could reactivate it if I felt the need to and wanted to pursue that. So, I would like to think that that gives me a little credibility on some of these things, especially when we start talking about First Amendment rights and freedom of speech. That's core and foundational to what we studied in journalism, and so um, uh, this is where I want to go with it. I'm not wanting to pick sides in the partisan, because honestly, I get so sick of seeing hyper partisan individuals on either side that will they just lash out and attack if you say something that doesn't fit with what they believe. You know what? Different people have different opinions. If you actually are using your brain, you're not going to think exactly like the person next to you. The odds of that are slim. If both of you are thinking on your own because of your own experience, your own perspectives, your own situations, you're going to walk away with slightly different opinions of things. And that's not reason to start lashing out at one another. But there are some who will do that. And it'll probably happen as a result of this here, even though I'm genuinely not wanting this to be a politically partisan thing. I'm just wanting to talk about exactly this concept of freedom of speech. What is and what is not actually covered in that. So let's just start right there with the basic, fundamental, foundational concept. The concept of freedom of speech comes from the First Amendment to the Constitution, the very first amendment of the 10 that we label the Bill of Rights. Now, I don't want to digress off onto this too much, but it is important to note that the Bill of Rights is not a list of rights that government gives to us as people. In fact, it's pretty much exactly opposite of that. The Bill of Rights is a delineation of rights that the founders were saying everybody has these rights, and the amendments are intended to restrict and limit the government as to what it could or could not do, to put any kind of restrictions on these rights that we as individuals all have. That it's important to understand that, because you have to understand the First Amendment is not about giving a right to us. The First Amendment is about telling government what it cannot do in limiting our rights. In this case, the right of speech, freedom of speech. And so it is absolutely accurate and correct to say that somebody has the legal right to free speech, that they should be allowed to say what they want to say. That is absolutely true. But here's where it's important to understand a not so subtle distinction. Technically, First Amendment only applies to the United States Congress, because it flat out says at the beginning of the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting, and then it goes on to talk about religions, but freedom of speech is in there. And so technically, the First Amendment is saying what Congress, the federal legislative branch, what it cannot do. Now, over the years and the decades and the centuries, technically, the courts have expanded that interpretation to pretty much mean government in a very generic sense. That freedom of speech is something that is guaranteed and cannot be limited or restricted by government. Not even just federal government, but state, local, across the board. And so with that broader interpretation, which is what we'll now work with, it's still a matter of saying the legal governmental entity cannot restrict somebody from being able to express their ideas. And most people will go, that's right. But even at that, there are still limits that we do allow. The most common, the cliche example to use, but it's effective to illustrate, is it's illegal to walk into a crowded place, a movie theater, a store, whatever, and start yelling, fire, fire, get out of here, there's a fire, if there's no fire, because you cause panic, people can get injured, all kinds of damage, and that is an irresponsible thing for you to do. And so therefore, you don't have freedom of speech in the sense that there is a law established by governmental entity that says you cannot do this under penalty of being arrested for committing crime. So there are limits, there are restrictions. But honestly, the concept of freedom of speech has been used, not just about political statement. It's been used to justify pornography. It's been used to support print materials, broadcast materials, online internet published materials. I mean, freedom of speech is the way someone dresses, the way they present themselves. It's been used for commercials. It's been, I mean, there are all kinds of stuff that gets lumped in under this protected class of, you can't pass a law against this because it's freedom of speech. Okay, so we hopefully we can agree on that, because that's where we're at. There are some limits that have been put in place, like the you can't yell fire thing, but for the most part, the broad interpretation of the First Amendment freedom of speech is that anybody can say or present whatever they want, and government is not in position to arrest them, to imprison them for doing so. That's one big important thing to also grab onto. Because the other part of this, and this is where a lot of people that I'm seeing on social media, this is where they're missing the target on this topic. See, all of that is about what government can do to restrict by law, by imposing some sort of constricting of the ability for you to be able to express yourself. Government cannot do that. But saying government cannot restrict you from expressing yourself does not then also mean you are free from facing any repercussions once you have expressed yourself. If you make use of your freedom of speech to say something that others around you find highly offensive, they may let you know that they are highly offended by that, and you may not like the consequences. Case in point, right out of Des Moines, Iowa, this last Halloween, there was this idiot that showed up at a popular bar wearing a Nazi costume. It might have even been a Hitler costume. I think he had the little mustache. I don't know if he was trying to actually be Hitler, because the little Hitler stash was pretty popular at that time in Germany, and so he might have just been trying to be random German soldier person. And there was all kinds of firestorm came down about that. The individual, the company he was working for, continues actually to this day to be blasted about his involvement with that. I know there was a photo of him and two female companions that were with him, laughing it up with him. Or at least one of them was a volunteer coach at Drake University. She got fired. She got bounced out of that role. The venue where the guy was allowed to be there for the evening still is trying to do their damage control and try to recover from that. They took a thumping because of that. And there was other. I mean, there were entire Facebook groups that apparently this idiot was part of that completely shut down because nobody wanted to be associated in any way with this knucklehead. Now, did he break any laws by dressing like a Nazi? Well, no. First Amendment allows him to be able to express himself through his outfit. And there's absolutely no law against dressing like a Nazi. That is not illegal. It's stupid, but it's not illegal. There's also no law that says once he dresses up like a Nazi that he cannot go into a public venue. So a lot of people are like, well, why didn't the bar kick him out? Well, for the bar itself, they're in a little bit of a catch-22, or a little bit of a quandary, because while certainly every private businesses, reserve the right to refuse service to whoever they wish, uh, that in and of itself can lead to legal issues for them. And now we're in such a litigious society that businesses are always walking on eggshells in matters like this, because, well, if I do this, will I get sued? Or if I do that, will I get sued? I don't want to get sued neither way. And so they're trying to walk this fine line of trying to appease everybody. And in a situation like this, it totally backfires, because the owner of this establishment would say, well, I mean, I know I didn't like that he was there, but, I don't want to rock the boat. It's just a costume. I'm trying to downplay it. But a lot of other people disagree with that mindset. And that's why there's the firestorm that came out of this. But again, there's no law against the individual, stupid as he was, showing up in a Nazi costume and being in this establishment. And yet, all this other stuff happens because of people's reactions to this guy choosing to dress that way. Because this is the distinction between he legally could dress that way. He legally could go out in public that way. He did not demonstrate any intelligence or wisdom in doing so. And then he and his associates faced the repercussions of his bad choices, of his poor decision making, because First Amendment freedom of speech says you are allowed to speak. In his case, it wasn't so much his speaking verbally, it was his speaking, physically through his presence. But that he could do. That was legal. But then there was the fallout afterwards. There was the repercussions of that. Same thing is going on now with these other instances that I cited at the outset, where there are these people who are out there proclaiming things and accusing things and just being rather malicious in stuff that they proclaim. And in doing so, they leave themselves open to repercussion, because they can say it. That's covered under First Amendment. But if there's fallout because of what they said, they're not protected from that fallout by First Amendment. None of us are. Colin Kaepernick is another good example of this. Here's a guy who, he's felt very impassioned about the cause that he was standing up for, although that's kind of a misnomer, because he was kneeling. It was because he didn't stand. The cause that he was championing, we'll say that, because he wanted to kneel during the national anthem as a sign of protest. Now, I've already gone on record myself personally as someone who sings national anthems saying I don't have a problem with someone choosing to kneel or protest during national anthem. The reason I don't have a problem with that is because in a roundabout way, that individual is acknowledging that there is something unique and special about this minute and a half that this song is going on. That's why they're choosing it, that moment in time, to make the statement they're making. I would rather have somebody choose to sit down or kneel or very intentionally acknowledge the seriousness of this, the significance of this moment with this song, than to have what I see all the time, especially like baseball game stuff, idiots in the stands who are, busy drinking their beer on their phone, yakking up with their buddies, not even paying attention while the national anthem is going on. And yet those are some of the same people who will complain about a Colin Kaepernick who kneels. But back to Colin. Colin wound up being at the center of a firestorm, much like Nazi guy in Des Moines was. Not that I'm saying, Colin, don't connect those. I'm not using that word for Colin. I'm saying there's similarity in the fallout of what they experienced. Colin wound himself getting fired, and he hasn't played football since. Yeah, no team will touch him. What was his big crime? His big crime was that on company time, while he's representing his team, he was in uniform. He chose to make a personal political statement, and you know, if I was sitting here making very political, personal, heated statement wearing my work shirt from Baker, I'd I would probably I'd probably get smacked pretty hard for that, because that, unless the company has authorized this, unless the company is saying it's okay for me to speak out like that, I should not be representing the company on my shirt, or in any way, while I'm expressing my own personal opinion. And that's the problem that Colin Kaepernick fell into. Say, well, wait a minute, Paul. Just a little bit ago, you said First Amendment is that there's nothing illegal with expressing it, and that's true. Colin Kaepernick was not there was he broke no law by doing what he did, by kneeling and proclaiming what he did during that point in time. However, that law, again, says what government can or cannot do. His employer, the football team he was playing for, is a private company. They are a private employer, and they are fully within their bounds to say, you know what? We don't like the way that you're representing our company. You're out, buddy. Another place where this is showing up is in the wake of the death of Charlie Kirk. There were a lot of people who commented online, and some people didn't say the nicest things. Some people said some actually pretty ugly things, celebratory things about how great it was that he was dead and stuff like that. And some of those people who posted the more negative stuff then found themselves getting fired and being the subject of firestorm. And now some of those individuals are pushing back and saying, wait a minute, I should not have been fired. I have First Amendment freedom of speech. I can say whatever I want. Again, yes, you could, and you did. And you did not get arrested for that, because your First Amendment guaranteed right to free speech meant you could do that. However, the First Amendment does not cover the repercussions that come after that. The First Amendment does not mean private companies have to tolerate that. If the company feels like you are not representing their brand, their identity, that you're making them look bad because you are seen as a representative of the company, and now you're out here doing or saying this stuff that people find offensive, well, the company is fully within its rights to be able to say, you're out the door, buddy. And especially in a state like Iowa, that's a right to work state. I mean, that's good for people that don't want to be in a union, and they want to be able to work in places where there are union presence, but not have to be in the union in order to work in the industry. However, the downside is that does mean that an employer can, for almost any reason, whatever they choose, say, yep, you're out. Unless you have a contract with them signed that describes a certain amount of time you are guaranteed to be employed and things like that, you can be bounced out just like that with very little notice. So I mean, it's a double-edged sword that we play with there. But the point is, these individuals think that they have a case to say, oh, you know what? I am covered under freedom of speech, and so I should be able to say these things. Yeah, and that's why you got to say them. But the freedom of speech doesn't mean you are absolved from responsibility for what happens after you say those things. And again, I am not trying to take sides. I'm not trying to say who's right, who's wrong. I'm just trying to clarify what the facts are of these topics, because I'm seeing on social media, I'm seeing a lot of people who They clearly slept through civics class in school. They've not gone. They've not studied for a journalism degree. That much is very plain to see. And nor have they studied U.S. government and U.S. history to the extent that some of us have. Others have studied these things more than I have. I'm not trying to proclaim again that I'm like this big expert, but I do know a thing or two about the topic. And what I do know is there is a difference between what the First Amendment covers and what you are responsible for once you say something. These are not the same thing. They're not even connected in that way. This allows you to say or do or present what you wish. And with few limits, there are some, as we said, but with few limits, you are able to do that to your heart's content. However, when you do that in a way where you fail to utilize common sense, you fail to be rational about how you're doing this, you fail to consider the implications of what you're saying and what you're doing and what the fallout from that will be, you leave yourself open to having used your freedom of speech that's guaranteed by the First Amendment. You've used it in a way that has now set you up for some hurt over here. Because now you said or did what you chose to, and now there's a price that may have to be paid for what you chose to say and do. First Amendment does not absolve somebody from that responsibility. First Amendment freedom of speech is absolutely a wonderful thing, and we all need to make full use of that. But when we make full use of that, we need to also be making full use of this. You need to be smart about how you do it. Don't just be firing stuff off. Don't just be mouthing off and saying things without any regard for what may come to pass afterwards. That is how you make your point. That is how you make a difference. That is how you keep yourself from being on the receiving end of bad situations. All right. Well, I've rambled on enough on this. You can tell because of my background, this was something that really resonated with me, and I really wanted to share this. And again, there are probably going to be some people who are going to watch this and they're going to pick at it, and there's going to be some things they're going to disagree with, and that's fine. I don't expect everyone to agree with me. That's the beauty of using this thing up here, is not the hat, the brain inside your head. When we do that, when we use this thing up here, we actually come up with our own opinions. We actually have something that matters to us that may not agree with this person and that person and that person. Doesn't mean you're right and they're wrong, or that they're right and you're wrong. It means you have a difference of opinion. Embrace it. It's good to not all be cookie cutter the same. If we were, there'd be no need for First Amendment free speech. We'd all be saying the same thing. I'm glad we have it. Hopefully you are too. And with that, I'll see you next time from my front porch.